Hello, friends. In this episode, we're going to be talking about fantasy magic, and I'm going to be making the argument that fantasy magic is not what you think it is. Let's get into it. To start, what do people think fantasy magic is? Well, magic systems. Let's go straight to it. People think of magic systems when they think of fantasy magic. They think of hard magic systems and soft magic systems. They think of the ability to force push and pull. They think of the ability to cast spells, cast fireball. This is what we think of as magic. In other universes, like Tolkien's, you might say that the magic is in the ability to craft things that have a will of their own. Maybe even if we're going to stretch further than that, right? If someone has a broader concept of what magic is in fantasy systems, they think of the creatures, they think of dragons, right? Which dragons don't technically have to be magical in that classical sense to be creatures in a fantasy world, but they think of them, or they think of like druids, or like, yeah, mythical spirits. Maybe they think of genies. It just depends kind of where you're from in terms of what races and creatures you might get out of that. These are the things they think of. If you thought of the epicenter of what is fantasy magic, you're going to think of magic systems, typically spells, enchantments, incantations. And then you move a little bit out and you think of things like, yeah, potions and creatures and races. All cool, all wonderful, all fine and fun to have in stories, but I'm going to propose to you that reskinned sci-fis have the same thing. Is that true? I think that's true, right? Like, they might have fake science to get you there, but those are their spells. And not to say that there's not a sense in which that's magical, but what I'm trying to do is expand our boundaries here for just a minute to get us to see that might not be enough to say, oh, this is magic. Right? Potions, okay, well, we don't have potions in Star Trek, but we've got crazy good, medical machines. We might not have elves, but we've got the Klingons. We might not have. I'm trying to think of what like creatures Star Trek has. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a whole variety and skew of things that exist. Yeah, they've got the ability to beam up people in Star Trek. This is magic, right? These are spells that they have, but it's technologically based, and so there's a real sense in which the transferability is off the charts there, which is really cool. But my point is that in and of itself is not what makes the story magic. There's a quote I saw. I'm going to paraphrase it here, but I think it applies to this moment. And if I can find it, I'll put it up on screen. We'll give credit to who it is. It's not my quote, but I read someone say, this is on Pinterest, right? So, right, I don't know the surrounding context, but things don't stop being magical just because you understand how they work. So he's not talking about fantasy writing. He's not talking about sci-fi. He's talking about in our own lives. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like, it's crazy that rivers run downhill. It's crazy that people fall in love. It's crazy that clocks tick and get the second right every single time. It's crazy that the sun comes up and goes down. There's everything in this world is magic. And in fact, I would love to see, this is my little push, if you're a writer and you want to create a brand new genre, sort of, I would really love to see something called like fantastical nonfiction, where it's not, no element is introduced outside of our world, outside of the experiences people can have, but it is talked about in a way that is like reflective of what, that's not so blind to the world around us, right? Like, we talk about fireflies like it's no big deal. Like, even in the name, fireflies. We've got these bugs that glow, and they come up and they fill fields with light. Like, that's magic. That's insane. What is magic? I think what we're really talking about is like that heartbeat, the whimsy, the thing that fantasy is really well known for, right? We think of knights and dragons. Sure, those are icons for it. But more than there are knights or dragons in stories, more than there are specific magical elements in stories, the things that make fantasy fantastic, that make them wonderful and good, is the heart behind them. It's the ability to remind us of senses we thought we had lost, right? Senses that had grown dumb, null, had kind of gone to sleep. And so, like, in our own world, maybe you wake up, you go to work straight away, right? You're sipping your coffee, you've got your tie on, you're like, okay, I'm like half awake, I'm not having a great time. And you do that throughout the majority of your day. The sun goes down, and then a couple hours later, you go home. Maybe you exercise, maybe you don't. Maybe you turn on the TV, maybe you don't. Maybe you eat a piece of food, maybe you don't. Maybe you hang out with someone you love, maybe you don't. And then you go to bed and you do it again. And it can be really easy to forget that the world is beautiful and that there's meaning and goodness and that there's a point. Fantasy flips that back for us. Fantasy says, no, there's real good in this world. Yeah, there's real evil. We've got to confront both here, but there's real good. Yes, there's real darkness, but there's also real light. Yes, there's real ugly, but there's also real beauty and valor and noble things and graceful things and wonderful things. And if you could only see your world as if you were a newcomer coming into it for the first time, you would understand that this is magic. And so what I want to encourage you to do as you think through your stories is there are plenty of stories that introduce new mechanics to them, or games, or books, or take your pick, that are completely devoid of magic despite the magic in them. Real magic requires us to go a little deeper. It requires us to say something true. It requires us to speak to the heart and to remind us of the whimsy that exists in our world, because our world is full of magic, and you don't have to go into fantasy to find it. I love fantasy. I'm not posing against it. I'm just saying that the reason fantasy is fantasy, the reason fantasy is magic, is actually because fantasy is a whole lot more true than it is fiction. Guys, thank you so much for sitting with me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one as I continue to craft out graphic fantasy novels, fantasy graphic novels, and hang out with you.